How you doing, everybody? John Arezzi here for another edition of Pro Wrestling Spotlight Live, streaming on both YouTube at John Arezzi's Matt Memories and also on Facebook at facebook.com, John Arezzi's Matt Memories. I'd like to welcome everybody who's joining us today from wherever you may be watching from. We have a really cool show for you today. Our special guest is going to be Michael Holmes, the executive editor for ECW Press, and I've gotten to know Michael over the last year and a half, almost 2 years now. He gave me a book deal, and Matt Memories is the name of the book, and we've talked about it here, and it was written by Greg Oliver and myself, and Greg has done several books. So we're going to talk to Michael about several things, about his role at ECW Press, some of the projects that he's worked on. And he's a real interesting guy, and this is going to be a really cool show today to get a little insight from the executive editor of ECW Press, Michael Holmes. And I found a clip in my archives, which I'm going to premiere today. This is the first and only footage that I know of this match that took place at Madison Square Garden. And that was back on July the 22nd, 1974. I was sitting in the first row when John Tolis challenged Bruno Sammartino, then WWF champion, for the title at a sold-out Madison Square Garden. Tolis was always one of my favorite wrestlers, and I got to know John really well when he started working for Herb Abrams and the UWF. But this match has never before been seen. I don't think there's any footage of it that exists anywhere. So I got about 3 minutes of that I'll show you here today at Pro Wrestling Spotlight Live. To talk about the big elephant in the room, we had an election this past week in the United States, and Joe Biden was declared president-elect today based on the projections of the various networks. So there is this is a very divided country, as we've talked about. So anyway, I don't really talk about politics too much, but it's a interesting time in this country. And of course, Alex Robertson with the news, who I'm going to bring on right now. Actually, Alex is in Canada, and let me get rid of this background there, Alex. There we go. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, John?
I'm doing okay. It's been a crazy day. It's been a crazy week. I literally have been glued to the television since the election, since election night, and wake up in the morning, put the TV on, go about my business, do the work that I need to do each and every day, and go for my daily walks here in Tennessee. And as soon as I got back home, that TV's back on. And then today and this morning, I think CNN was the first to project Biden as president-elect, and there's cause for celebration. Trump is tweeting tonight, I didn't lose, and so I don't know what's going to happen here. I did get my passport renewed, so if all hell breaks out, anyway, the borders are closed. I can't even go up there to Canada or anywhere else. I don't know. I'm trapped. But how are you? How are you? You've been following the election. I know that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the anxiety started setting in probably last weekend in anticipation, because I knew I was going to have to cover this on my own show as a content producer. But I think, ever since Wednesday hit, and I was like you, glued to the TV. And I think the first night after I went to sleep, I saw Biden and Trump's face in my sleep so much that it kept waking me up, because I didn't know what was going to happen. And the constant, like being in my office, trying to work, trying to, constantly update my viewers and my listeners, and then running downstairs to the TV because another state has, said it's red or blue and this, that, and the other thing. So it's been a crazy week for us up here too. Just trying to keep track of everything. It's been tiring, but so rewarding. And I'm pleasantly surprised that there was an announcement today that that Biden was named president-elect. I didn't know it was going to be this fast. I was prepared for anything, but it's going to be an interesting week, to say the least. So yeah,
I've tried to stay not talking about my political beliefs. And during the course of my life, I voted on both sides of the aisle. I voted for Republicans. I voted for Democrats. I mean, I really consider myself an independent more than anything else. And this has been so polarizing because, people that are very close to me, people that I went to college with, people in my family, we've had opposing political viewpoints, and it's so polarizing. I mean, all I did today was just post on my Facebook page that Biden was projected as president-elect, and I didn't put any comments near it. And I started getting all this hate, and people were just, just really attacking, and I didn't editorialize. And on Twitter, I've lost about 25 people who followed me just because I reposted. Something Mick Foley put up, basically. So it's been crazy. It's been crazy. So I am just wanting peace. I want stability. I don't want the division and the hatred. And we're so divided as a country here that I think we've all had enough of it, really. But Trump is Trump,
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, is it just me, or were you actually on TV or something with him, or did I see that somewhere?
I was on a TV show in 2007. It was on NBC. It was called Deal or No Deal. It was hosted by Howie Mandel. I mean, it's still on, I believe. I think they brought it back. And my sister, Donna, who was living here at the time in Tennessee, desperately wanted to go back to New York. And they had an open edition here in Nashville. And my sister, Donna, is just this bubbly, vibrant personality. If I could compare her to anyone, it's Marissa Tomei from the movie My Cousin Vinny. Okay. Very Italian. Very New York, and they did this open audition. I said, you should go and audition for the show because there's all these Southern people here, and you're going to stand out like a sore thumb. So my nephew was playing in Little League down here, and she goes, I got to go to Dominic's game. He hasn't gotten a hit yet. I was like, I got to watch him get his first. I said, you have to go to the audition. Just go. I'm at Dominic's Little League game, and maybe he'll get his first hit because you're not there. So she shows up at this audition, and they waited about 15 hours. She waited 15 hours to do the audition in front of the casting people, and she got in there, and they loved her. They did a callback the next day, and then she got selected for the show. And they decided to make it the season premiere, and they decided to turn it into this whole New York, let's bring Donna back to New York show and see if we can have her win enough money to get back to New York. And it was New York themed. I mean, the producers reached out to me, and they flew out 50 close family, friends, relatives. I got them to bring Mr. Met out. I was a big Mets fan. So they brought all these people out. But the surprise of the season premiere was the banker. If you watch Deal or No Deal, there's models with suitcases with money in them. And then there's a banker that tries to get you to leave the game. And the banker for that season premiere was Donald Trump, host of The Apprentice. And my whole family loved The Apprentice. I mean, we watched The Apprentice. And so Trump was there. My sister loved Trump, and she went nuts. And lo and behold, I mean, in the middle of the game, he was lowballing her with offers and So I fired him. Like he used to do it, everybody. I was like, I have 2 words for you, Mr. Trump. Can I say 2 words to him? You're fired. So I think I'm the second person who ever fired Donald Trump on national TV, the first being Vince McMahon when he was doing the wrestling stuff. But what happened after my sister didn't do well. She won about $25 in that game. And after the show, my nephew was there, and he was in the audience. I was one of the helpers on stage, and my nephew was really upset because my sister was upset that she didn't do well. And in the back, they're shooting B-roll, and they're taking pictures. And Trump called my sister and my nephew over and gave my nephew $25,000 for his education. It had nothing to do with the show, and it was crazy. It was so cool. I mean, And then later on, and several years later, when my sister did finally get back to New York, my nephew had some medical issues, and Trump paid for them. So the family had an endearing thing for Donald, personally, I it's a hard thing for me because I just was torn, especially when he started running for president, and then all this stuff and everything, his actions and all of that. And I don't want to get too political here, but it wasn't the same person that I had a family experience with. Let's put it that way. Yeah. And that show is still around. I think there's a streaming platform called Tubi or something like that show is on. Yeah. It's still there. It's there. And I've never posted the clip of me firing the Donald because I promised my sister I wouldn't do it, But the bottom line is, no matter what your political beliefs are, whether you're on the red side, the right side, the bottom line is right now, everyone needs to try to come together. And I know he's tweeting that he's not giving up, and there's a real fear, there's real excitement here. Mm-hmm. But not to get too political in this, but I mean, it's overwhelmed all of our lives, and it's going to continue to do so, it looks like, for a while, and we don't know what's going to happen. But
that's right,
we don't. But anyway, what's going on in wrestling? We seem to have like a Hell in the Cell match between Trump and Biden. But there's got to be some cool things going on in the wrestling business this week. So why don't we get to that?
Yeah. So to start off with tonight, AEW's Full Gear pay-per-view is on tonight. And I'm always excited for AEW's pay-per-views in a different way, I would say, from WWE. But I think just because this promotion's so new, they're always adding more talent, and it just makes it that much more exciting. One match that I'm really looking forward to is the Hangman Adam Page and Kenny Omega match. And they will be fighting for an opportunity to fight for the AEW World Championship. And I think that this feud is a long time coming. I think at the beginning of this tournament, very early on, when they were trying to establish who these two finalists would be for this contender championship, I think it was kind of obvious that, those two would make a very good match. We know they have great chemistry. They've been a tag team before, and you could see when they were a tag team, the feud building up and that it would turn into something explosive, and it has. So very, very much looking forward to that. And one that I'm kind of curious about is the Matt Hardy and Sammy Guevara match. And now last time they had a match in a pay-per-view, did not go very well. One of them got sent to the hospital, right? So
yes. That was scary. That was scary.
It was. So as much as I know that Matt Hardy loves taking risks, and I know Sammy Guevara would be all for it, but I really hope that this time they really be careful and take the necessary precautions. Like maybe don't go outside of the ring onto a concrete floor. I don't know. Maybe that's, not the way to go. But nonetheless, I hope it's going to be a great match.
Well, I hope so too. I mean, then you have MJF with Jericho tonight, right? That's going to be another big one.
Yes. And again, Jericho, like we've said before, he's the prime example of a leader in this promotion that can take newer talent and harvest their creative and their technique and just make them better. Now, MJF, it has a lot of star quality on his own, which I think this is why this match works so well, is because you have two people who are so charismatic, who are good wrestlers. And they've been building up for this for a long time. I mean, they've had their promos, and it's been funny, regardless of, how some people felt about their little musical act a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. I mean, they've been really building it up nicely. So I'm hoping it comes together, and they put on a good show tonight.
Mm-hmm. Have you heard of anybody showing up? Let's say surprises at all? I mean, I've been listening to some different podcasts out there as well, and there's been a rumor, something about possibly Sting showing up tonight. Is that anything? Have you heard anything about that?
No, like they haven't. I've heard the rumor, and I think it was last week when if I'm not mistaken, his contract with the WWE in terms of merchandise ceased. It expired. Yeah.
Is the Legends contract, is that still in existence, or did that expire too?
I believe that also expired, which is why, I mean, I think at this point, any big name that comes from WWE, let's say, every time they leave the company or their contract expires, I think everyone's logical point would be they're going to AEW. Although that hasn't necessarily been the case for everybody, it could be very well be the case for Sting. And if he's going to make an appearance on a promotion like AEW, it would be tonight. Where that would happen, I don't know. Will it happen in the I Quit match between Eddie Kingston and Jon Moxley? I don't know. It could happen in the tag team match between FTR and the Young Bucks. Who knows? But I would say don't be surprised if he shows up tonight. That's all. I'm gonna leave it at that.
Well, it'd be interesting to see, and I am going to check it out tonight after we're done with the broadcast and after President-elect Biden does his speech tonight. So wouldn't surprise me if President Trump does a speech at the very same time. So we'll have to see. But what else is shaking up there? What else is going on in wrestling? Anything else or?
Yeah. In relation to AEW, we knew that they had this partnership with NWA, and especially with the Women's World Championship. And I saw this week that Allison Kay, who was the former NWA Women's Champion, she's no longer with the company, and she's saying that she's a free agent. But then all of a sudden, she's appeared on Full Gear's card tonight. She'll be challenging for the NWA World Championship against Serena Deeb, who took it from Thunder Rosa a couple of weeks ago. So that's interesting too. And I think it's a good fit. I've seen Allison Kay in person. I've interviewed her twice, and I think her character and her experience, I think it could really do well in a company like that. So I'm not necessarily saying that they're going to sign her, but I think the fact that she's on this card challenging for a championship says something. Yeah. So they both have a lot of experience. I mean, Serena Deeb, if I'm not mistaken, has 15 years experience in the ring. So, I mean, they're both very good competitors. So that as well should be a good women's match. Very
cool. I checked out NXT UK, and there was an extraordinary match there between, and I never watched it before. I was listening to Brian Last and Cornette on a podcast, and they were just raving about this match. Do you know anything about these guys? Have they been around for a while? I think one guy's name is Walter, and then I forgot the other guy's name already, but I'm going to watch it again because it was extraordinary. I mean, and I had never heard of these guys before. Do you watch the NXT UK at all?
I dab in and out of it. I've watched Walter several times, and he is the stereotypical monster of a wrestler.
Oh yeah,
huge, and
very stiff, and I mean very believable. Yeah, and just kind of this heel character that I was like, why haven't they brought him to the States?
Yeah, but I think I think it's actually a good thing that he's over there, because I would prefer it anyway for all of WWE's brand to have an equal amount of talent, if that makes sense. So if he's going to be, this big, strong heel that's going to draw in the fans, he'd be best suited to stay at NXT UK, because then he's going to draw eyes over there. And he certainly did. I mean,
yeah, Ilya was a guy. Richard Newsham is one of our fans from the UK. So he's much more familiar with what's going on over there. Yeah, but it was very cool. I mean, it was fascinating to me to see something really that Dragunov, that's his name? Ilya Dragunov.
Yes.
Thank you, Richard.
Yes. Yeah. Oh my God. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Dave Meltzer did give it 5 stars or something like that. So, when Dave Meltzer gives any kind of stars a match, people are going to view it, right? Especially if it's a 5-star match.
5 stars. Yeah. 5 stars.
Yeah. I think this one definitely warranted it though.
Wow. Yeah. So what else? Anything? Because we're going to bring on Michael after you're done, and we're going to have a nice conversation with the ECW guy.
Yeah.
Not Paul Heyman, Michael Holmes.
I mean, there's not really much to report with the WWE right now. They're both brands, the red and blue brand, are both gearing up for the Survivor Series pay-per-view. So they're in the midst of compiling both teams on the women and men's side. And they've had qualifying matches back and forth. But I think this week, in terms of viewership for especially Raw, I think because there was so much else going on in the States. It kind of took a back seat. It was just like AEW. They were also affected because they were on Wednesday. And that's, when a lot of the aftermath of the election came out. So their ratings dropped a little bit, but it's not really surprising.
Yeah, it had to drop. I mean, there was no other thing. I mean, everyone was just watching the election results.
Yeah, but I mean, like the one thing that really kind of surprised me was Raw's third hour was one of their lowest rated hours that they've ever had. And that usually is not the case. Usually the last hour is when you're building up to the main event. And it didn't go well this week. So I don't know if that's because, it's kind of dropped off a little bit, or like I said, because there's other things going on in the States and people's minds are elsewhere right now.
Yeah, everybody's minds are elsewhere right now for sure. But we appreciate your report as we do each and every week here. And I'm going to invite you to hang out with us for a while. I mean, I'm going to bring Michael on. Michael Holmes joining us also from Canada.
Hi, Alex. Hi, John.
Hey.
How you doing, Michael? Welcome.
Doing well. I actually remember Walter in Survivor Series last year getting Claymore kicked by Drew McIntyre.
Oh, really?
So he has been on WWE programming.
That's right.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Michael, you looking for a gig? We're bring you on each and every week to be a fact checker.
No, but I think I did have an idea though where Sting could show up in the Full Gear pay-per-view. He would be great coming out between Cody and Darby Allin, because Darby Allin's essentially Sting.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true. We'll see what happens tonight. That'll be great.
Yeah.
But welcome to the show. I mean, Michael, I've known you now for almost a couple of years. I think almost 2 years. I think January of 2019, I sent an email to you. I was referred to by Tim Hornbaker, another great author, about an idea that I had about a book, and I knew you were the guy up there at ECW Press. And we'll get into my book in a little bit, but I've known you for a while now, and you're the guy up there at ECW Press. You're the executive editor. So to kind of give our viewers a little bit of a background on you, tell us about what you do up there and how you got started with ECW Press.
I actually published my very first book in 1992 with ECW, a book of poems. I was doing a PhD at York University up here, and that trend. The guy who was their editor at the time, the poetry editor, left for a gig in Berkeley, and the owner of the company, Jack David, asked if I wanted to come on and start editing. And so I learned on the fly. And at first I was just doing collections of poetry, and then I started branching out into fiction and nonfiction books about music. Eventually took over. I guess I grappled with the idea of doing wrestling books, because that in the early 90s, there was still a prejudice against wrestling books. There was this prejudice that wrestling fans don't read. But I grew up, my dad and I used to watch AWA wrestling, used to watch broadcasts out of Hamilton when I was a kid. So I grew up with wrestling. And I knew that in the early 90s that wrestling fans, and you know this, John, wrestling fans are incredibly loyal. They're the epitome of the diehard fan. And the sport ages with them. The entertainment ages with them. So if you're a wrestling fan as a kid, there's a really good chance that at some point later in life, you're going to come back to wrestling. It's like old wrestlers. You never really leave. You keep getting drawn back in. But in the early 90s, I guess I started to think, well, wrestling fans are the demographics aging, and they have a disposable income. And when wrestling fans are fans, they like to buy merchandise that relates to wrestling. And so I thought it was kind of a perfect marriage. There's a lot of great stories from wrestlers that hadn't been told up to that point. And slowly you started to see it happen. So there was us, and then eventually WWE got their deal with Simon & Schuster and started doing those books, and other publishers around America started doing some wrestling books. But we've been doing them at ECW since the early 90s. I've done about 80 wrestling-related books now. 80?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I bought several of them actually. I got the Apple
Yeah.
book. I'm in the middle of this one right now, which is
It's a
the
good book.
Andre book. I mean,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, yes. But yeah, I mean, as you were saying, people in my in the demographic, as you get older, and if you were a wrestling fan as a kid, you might come back and watch. Typically, it happens. I've done that 3 or 4 times. I leave, I come back. I leave, I come back, and
Yep.
but I got involved in the business. So, but what was the first? What was the first? You remember the first book you published? Like the first wrestling book that you published?
The very first one that I was involved with was a collection of photography that actually I didn't acquire. Jack David acquired because we found this incredible cache of photographs, and this guy came with these old pics. But the first one that I actually acquired was, my God, it was probably maybe Greg Oliver's Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, the Canadians, was one of them.
Okay.
Larry Mattisic's Wrestling at the Chase, but there were books like that. There was also Death of WCW that
Yes.
we did that did very well for us.
Yeah, I bought that one. That was a good one. But Greg has done a lot of books with you.
Yeah, he really has. I think we're up to, with your book now, it might even be like his 12th or 13th different book, because he's done hockey books with us as well.
It's amazing. It was amazing.
He's one of my favorite authors.
Oh, he's a wonderful guy. I mean, just being associated with him and having him take on the project, Matt Memories, and getting to know him and how meticulous he is and how thorough he is and how patient he was with me, especially as a first-time author. What an amazing guy. And Alex, obviously, you know him really well.
Very well.
You work for Slam, but great guy as well. But yeah, it's been a great ride so far. Back to some of the history of what you've done in the wrestling space at ECW. What was the most, up to this point, the most successful book that you guys have had? And you've had a lot of successful books, but which one kind of stands out as the one that has resonated more than others?
The book that has had a following since the minute it came out, and I think it just speaks again to the nature of wrestling fandom, is the Death of WCW. That there's something about that story that still we still sell thousands of copies of that book today, only because I think it's so well told. The narrative is laid out in front of you, and people are just fascinated by what the heck happened. Yeah. But their books that we've done, like Tim Hornbaker's NWA book, I think is one of the greatest historical accounts of any professional sport or any entertainment in American journalism, nonfiction. It's had a solid following, but it just hasn't had the numbers. It's such a great history. His most recent book, same deal. It's done really well. Greg's Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame books have done really well for us. Larry Mattisic's Wrestling at the Chase, for a book that's focused on such a small but significant territory like St. Louis, was a real eye-opener for us, because it was really a regional title, but it was like dealing with the old territories. There's so many fans in St. Louis that just bought the book for years. So there's been lots of them that have done, I think, really well. The recent one that we've done, that you showed, the Andre the Giant book, has done very well for us. And the Keith Elliott Greenberg book that we just did, Too Sweet, I'm really proud of that, and it's selling very well as well.
I had Keith on the show actually, and there it is. What a great author he is. Oh my goodness. And what a history he's got. Oh, wow.
He's another guy like you that's been around, that was around New York and around wrestling for a long time. And in a lot of ways, his career trajectory in terms of his fandom parallels yours. It's really cool.
Yeah, we're dinosaurs. I feel like sometimes, and especially with today's presentation of the product, and I always yearn for the old days, like everybody in my generation does. But are there any like ones that got away? Like, we wish we could have signed this book that might have went elsewhere for a publisher, or is any you could recall that you would have loved to have signed?
There's a couple. There's the one that I really wish, the one writer I really wish that I could have worked with, because there used to be a show here on TSN called Off the Record. They would interview wrestlers quite often, and the producer of the show would a lot of times, it was Michael Landsberg's show. He was the host, but the producer would often, when they had a wrestler on, would call me up and ask for help writing questions for the host. They never could pay you, and I used to do this all the time. So every once in a while, when a guest backed out, they would call me up because I lived pretty close, and they would have me down onto the show. And one show I happened to get on was with Jericho, and so I'm backstage with Jericho, and we started talking, and we were just talking about books, and we had this conversation where he said, "Someday I'm going to write a book." And that's the one to me that I wish that I could have snagged him away from the New York publishing house, for a lot of different reasons, because the book did well, but also because he's a Canadian. So I would have really liked to have had that on our list. There's, I would have loved to have worked with JR on his book. But, the nice thing is I'm usually just happy for people who get their books out. So as much as I like publishing these things, I'm also a fan, and books coming out with other companies. There are many books that I've passed on that have come out with other publishers, and I'm happy for those guys, and I go out and buy those books. So, or I'll refer guys to other publishers. So if Scott Teal publishes some great books with Crowbar, if he's doing a good book, I'm just happy for him. Sometimes I wish I had him. I had the books that he does, but I think there's plenty to go around.
Alex, any questions?
Yeah. What I want to know is, I was reading about this new book, or I think it's a new poetry book that you yourself just did, called Parts Unknown.
Yeah, I did that. Oh my gosh, I did that about a while ago now.
Was it 2004? Is that possible? Yeah. So what I want to know is, because I've always, whenever I read wrestling books, they're mostly biographies. And very often wrestlers have a ghostwriter, and it's very well written, but it's very different from poetry. So how do you kind of bridge the poetry world with wrestling? Like, how exactly did you do that?
Okay, that's a really interesting question, Alex. The way it started was just out of my fandom, and I, in a lot of cases, in a lot of the poems in the book, I took characters, whether it was Mad Dog Vachon, or it was Brock Lesnar, or it was the Hardy Boys, and I started to look at them through the lens of other poems. So there's a famous W.B. Yeats poem called Lita and the Swan. I started taking the idea of Lita and the Swanton Bomb, and I started to kind of meld the two together, the W.B. Yeats and the Hardy Boys. Mad Dog Vachon's life just kind of worked out perfectly because it was an exploration of what it meant to be Canadian for me. Or same thing with the poem that I wrote about Roddy Piper, thinking about his Canadian roots. So there were different things going on. The title poem was about my father, and about watching wrestling at 7 or 8 years old, and my dad doing impersonations of Ric Flair. My dad died a few years back, and some of my fondest memories when I'm thinking about him are just us two on a Saturday morning sitting on the couch and watching wrestling together. And the great thing is that I've been able to have that experience with my own son. So I've been able to take my son to a couple WrestleManias and just see that kind of same like joy in his eyes when he's watching wrestlers. So it's the book of poetry just kind of came naturally. And also, I really like the challenge of trying to do a book of poetry about something that the entire poetry world would hate me for. And it's funny because there's more snobbery in poetry than there is in the pro wrestling world. Like the wrestling fans would be okay with me doing poetry. The poetry fans were less okay with me talking about wrestling. So
you have an interesting cover on that book too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Mil Mascaras.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's still available out there. It's out there on Amazon.
It's out there.
Everywhere.
You can get it out there. Yeah.
Very, very cool.
Yeah. It's better than my book on Shania Twain.
Oh, you have a book on Shania?
Yeah, I did a pseudonymous book on Shania Twain for ECW, like way back. So yeah.
Wow, you've done quite a few music books, haven't you?
Yeah, we do a lot. I acquire a lot of ECW's music titles. There's one of my favorites is one that we did a couple years ago on a very important Canadian band that Alex will probably know, and you not so much, John. Is a band called the Tragically Hip.
Oh yeah.
I've heard of them. Sure.
Yeah. Gord Downey passed away a couple years back, and he was a national institution, national treasure. And the book was done by a really great music journalist here in Canada named Michael Barclay. And it's something I'm very, very proud of because there's no other book like it on the market.
There was a band from Canada that didn't get a lot of success here in the States, but they were called Toronto. I don't know if you remember them or not.
I do, yeah.
What a great band. When I was managing Patty Loveless back in the Carolinas in the early 80s, and she was doing rock and roll, she used to cover several of their songs. And I was like, those are great songs. You wrote, no, it's a band called Toronto. And, wow.
Yep.
I mean, it was
Patty Loveless would
phenomenal.
have had the perfect voice for it. There was another Canadian band called Headpins with a female singer that, like Toronto, just kicked butt.
I should send you some of the Patty tracks that I have. I do have some of the covers that she did.
That'd be cool.
Oh my goodness. I mean, what a voice. Whew.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff. Alex, any other questions?
Yeah. So I read also about, because I'm very fascinated by this book because I used to read poetry. And when I was in Cégep, which is like college here, I took a poetry class and I learned how to do it. And you learn about the greats. And I want to know, for, as you said, the poetry fans would not be so inclined with you mixing this into wrestling. So if somebody were to read this book that's not a wrestling fan, are they going to have to Google everything, like the moves, the characters, or are they going to be, able to follow along?
I always felt that you could follow along. I think that you got more out of it if you understood some of the characters and the history behind the characters that I was writing about, because in a lot of the cases I was taking things from a wrestler's real life and incorporating it into the poem about them. The poem about Ric Flair really isn't about wrestling at all. It's about the airplane crash. And so to me, that becomes very universal. That kind of tragedy, that kind of pain, that kind of rehab. But there's also some poems in the book, just because the language of wrestling is so beautiful. There's kind of an experimental, weird little poem, just about wrestling holds and the names of wrestling holds and wrestling moves. And you really don't need any other words. They're so expressive, and the language is so incredible that it has its own rhythms, it has its own music, and you can make an entire a soundscape just out of the names of wrestling maneuvers and wrestling holds. So I'd like to think that non-wrestling fans with an open mind could get a lot out of the book still, and also maybe learn something about how hard it is to be a wrestler. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's an interesting mix, wrestling and poetry, but wrestling is like poetry in a lot of ways.
They're kind of one and the same, right?
Exactly. And it's just, it was Lenny Poffo and me, and that's it.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Very cool. I got a question here that came in from the UK again. Did ECW Press ever do any books on UK wrestlers?
We've done books by UK wrestling writers. We've done books, but not really, other than Billy Robinson, nothing that's mentioned a lot in the book, nothing specifically about a UK wrestler. I wanted to do a book on Dynamite Kid at one point.
That would have been fascinating, that one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there is a very good book on their kids' books, actually fascinating, but it would have been, I think, good to do a journalistic account of his life as well. And there are other really great UK wrestling stories that I would, that I would consider doing. It just has to be the right writer and the right book. That's all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And other sports, I mean, obviously you've done several hockey books.
Yep.
Tell us about some of the sports books that ECW Press has published.
Well, we have done many, many hockey books. We've also done some baseball books. We did a book by the former Blue Jays radio broadcaster called Hello Friends that came out a couple of years ago. Jerry Howarth is another Canadian institution, even though he's an American, but he came up here and became the voice of the Toronto Blue Jays. He is probably hands down, next to you, John, the nicest guy I've ever worked with. He's just a truly great human being. He's the one who introduced me ultimately to Gibby, another guy that you know very well. So
yes, we got to get Gibby to write a book. He's got a fascinating life himself.
You got to get Gibby to write a book, and we got to publish it. Yeah.
Well, I'll be certainly back in touch with him pretty soon. With the Mets changing ownership, I have a funny feeling that he may get a call to have some part of the organization. Sandy Alderson is now running it again, and Sandy brings J.P. Ricciardi, who was the general manager of the Toronto Blue Jays and was my other roommate, because Gibby and JP were my roommates in the baseball days. I have and John is just scouting right now for the Braves, and he wants to get back in. So it wouldn't surprise me to see Gibby back in the Mets organization, and what a great guy he is, and what a life, and salt to the earth. I mean, just straight, and that's it. No BS with him.
I had a beer with him at a Conn Smythe event here a couple of years ago, and it was one of the best conversations with any sports celebrity, any figure in sports that I've ever had, because it was absolutely real.
So you'd give him a deal. You'd give Gibby a deal. You definitely would give him one.
If he calls in right now, I will make an offer live on the air.
I'm going to send him this a link to this. I'm going to send it to him. He's not that good with computers and technology, and he's definitely not a analytical guy when it comes to what's going on in the game today. But his story would be fascinating, and I love him to death. And his daughter is a talented singer, Jordan, who I've helped in the Nashville community, and she's got a new EP out. And he flew here not too long ago with his kid, and we hung out. And he wrote one of the forwards to my book. Right. So he's a good man. Good man.
See, this is where I didn't understand when you said that you don't really get political. I mean, you've worked in wrestling, you've worked in Nashville, and you've worked in baseball. It doesn't get more political than that. You're political all the time.
Yeah, you have to be. Yeah, you have to be political, and I mean, in the politics of the presidency. I mean, just because of the division in the country, and because I have friends and family members who are on opposite sides, you got to play the politics, and I never like to have heat with anyone. Yep. I really don't. I mean, I don't believe in that. I think spewing hatred, and I think spewing just things to say just because you want to divide and you want to separate people and you want to incite is not the way I've ever lived my life. And the pro wrestling business, you have to be political. In the music business, my goodness, you have to be political. And in baseball, you had to be political too.
That's right. And I think it's great words to live by. You don't have to bury anybody to put yourself over, right? You really don't.
No.
You can, by being a good human being, you get a lot further than by burying somebody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at it this way. Good, Alex, and I'll add a point. Do you have a comment or question?
No, I mean, like, I just on that point, I think that's very true. And I think that a lot of people, especially concerning this election, I think people just need to remember that, you don't have to constantly throw hate at somebody because they don't share the same opinions or the same values. I think at this point, whether it's all of the US or Canada and US together, everyone just needs to come together and just, like you said in the beginning, have peace, because that's the only way that we're going to move on from all of this that's been going on the last week, and the coronavirus too. That's the only way that we're going to get over all of this. We have to work together.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems going on right now, but I just, like I said earlier, I don't want heat with anyone. I mean, if people are going to be not following me or not buying my book or whatever, just because of who I voted for and who I supported in a very private way, then that's up to them. But I like to repair relationships too. I mean, Vinny Russo,
and another guy I worked with, and I loved working with.
Yeah, I mean,
and Vince Russo's reputation amongst a certain segment of the fan base of wrestling is not deserved. He can be very opinionated. He can say lots of things, but in his heart, Vince Russo, I know Vince Russo is as a good human being. And he takes a lot of crap from people.
Yeah, matter of fact, I think in my first email to you, I had given you a description of what I've done, and then I heard back from you the very next day, and you was like, "What a coincidence! I was just watching the YouTube you did with Vince Russo, and so you got to know who I was pretty much right out of the box, and because you did his book too. I mean, and so that kind of opened the door when I sent that introduction to you, and you had just finished watching the Resi Russo dialogue on YouTube, and when that happened, and I have to give my nephew credit for that because he is a big Russo fan, and in 2018 when Russo did his podcast Truth with Consequences, and started talking about me and saying things that were not really, I felt, factually accurate, I decided to say, all right, maybe it's time for me to come back and discuss this with him as a gentleman, not spewing hate. And he was the one individual in my entire life that I didn't have fond feelings for. But there was always a little piece inside of me saying, you know what? There was some good in there too. I mean, you had to look for it back in the day. I mean, and then when we had this conversation on YouTube, we talked it out, and we basically agreed to disagree on some points, and on other points there was a part where he cried, and because I said at one point I hated him, and I don't use that word lightly, and I've hardly ever hated anyone in my entire life. But to this day, I mean, we got together in Colorado when I was out there for the holidays, and he met my nephew, and then we commissioned a painting. My nephew and I, of one of his crazy paintings, and he sent it for me for Christmas time. And we do kind of keep in touch on social media, on Twitter. So there's no hatred there. There's definitely détente. And I could see how polarizing he is. And Vince, I think Vince is kind of in a corner right now. And I think Vince would love to do other things. He says he wants to get out of wrestling and all of that. But in a way, I mean, he became a polarizing figure, but he did change a lot of things about wrestling. And he was instrumental in some amazing things that happened in the wrestling business in the late 90s.
And I remember in that YouTube video when you guys were talking, I think there was also moments where he admitted he was wrong too. Like I think that he misremembered some things, and that he's got that capacity. He can be full of bluster. He can be very polarizing, like you said, but he'll also stop and think sometimes and say, "Oh, I made a mistake." And you got to give people like that credit sometimes.
Yeah, it was a volatile time in the wrestling business for sure. That was right in the end of 91. The scandals were coming out. His video stores were, hemorrhaging money because of the blockbuster chains that were opening up everywhere. And he was a wrestling fan and wanted to get in the wrestling business. And I had a radio show, and it was kind of a catalyst for him to get in. And we had opposing philosophies on it. I was covering more like a journalist, and he loved the entertainment part of the wrestling business. And it was a partnership that really should never have happened. However, it did. And, he achieved wonderful things. He was aggressive. I mean, that's one thing I remember him in the beginning. He was full force, go, 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 and not stopping sometimes to think. But he had his mission, and his mission, for the most part, was accomplished. But I'm glad to say that at this time, we have no heat, and I really don't have any heat with anybody out there right now, which is good. I mean,
I actually think that that's one of the most, beautiful and fascinating parts of your book, because you tell that story and how Vince, in a lot of ways, used your radio show as a stepping stone and made things very difficult for you. But you tell it in a way that doesn't come across as anything but generous. And that was, to me, that was really impressive, because I think you avoid the pitfall of what I don't like in books very, very well. It's just bitterness and saying it's all about me. You were actually able to look at the situation with an open mind and see all the sides of it, both from your, how much grief it caused you, but also why things were happening the way they were happening.
Yeah. That part of the book and like the rest of it. I mean, and I want to publicly thank you for even giving me the opportunity. I mean, I pitched an idea, and you said, well, if you could convince one of these guys to do it with you. And that's how Greg got into the picture. I met him at Cauliflower Alley, and also of Scott Teal as well, who I had some conversations with. And Greg was initially like, if this is about wrestling, I don't want to do it. And then I kind of had a conversation with him, told him my life story in a synopsis type of way. And then he was like, yeah, this is kind of interesting. The baseball part of it, the music part of it, growing up in Brooklyn, my dad in the, periphery of organized crime. I mean, all of the things that this book covers, and just for you to give me the opportunity. And every time I get a layout or the cover or anything, I'm so excited about it. And it comes out April the 6th. And man, I'm telling you, Michael, I just,
it's already gone up in the rankings on Amazon. So
yeah, I mean, it's still in the top 5 of new wrestling bios. I don't know what that means or not. And it's on the baseball. I mean, I was sandwiched in between Tom Seaver and David Wright. And cool, I was like, that's kind of nice. Yeah. So I'm excited. It comes out April the 6th. And, you gave me this opportunity, and I don't want to let anybody down, but I kind of I think it's a fascinating story.
It really is. And you just took the ball and ran with it. You and Greg have put together a really good book. I think it's going to appeal to a very wide market. Because it's not just about wrestling. It's not just about country music. It's not just about baseball. And you're right. Your life has, I was telling somebody earlier today that you were kind of like a Forrest Gump. You were everywhere, right? And really cool things have happened in your life. And the story, even if you're not a wrestling fan or you're not a country music fan, just the story of all the different iterations of the things that you've done and your different pursuits, it holds together as a really
under different
narrative.
Names.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, it's a crazy schizophrenic life, and it was captured, and it's coming out. We'll see what happens, and I'm just excited about it, because it really and the Forrest Gump analogy. I mean, that's the first time I've ever heard that, but that's not too far from the truth. I think
you're much better looking, though.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. It's just kind of, it's an interesting time in my life, because I know that next year when this thing comes out, I don't know what's going to happen. I hope the pandemic is at least part of the way going away, so there could be more maybe wrestling conventions and places to do appearances and such. But it's going to be an interesting ride, and I couldn't be happier than to do it with someone like yourself. And Greg has been, man, just amazing. He's like my psychologist, through this whole process. I tell him all these stories, and then he'd get back, and it was an interesting experience for me. So thank you again.
No, thank you. And I'm really excited. I can't wait for it to come out.
Very, very cool.
And
anything else on the
awesome.
I documented. That's the crazy thing. I kind of documented everything in my life, and I was telling someone the other day because I just found I digitized a bunch of stuff, my wrestling archives, and in between that there were like home videos of myself, from films when I was a baby all the way up to throughout my life, and I was always the family videographer, which means that at every party, at every graduation, at every Christmas, I'd be the guy just with the camera filming everybody, their whole, and so now, and they would look at me like I was an idiot, like, you're always filming, stop filming us. And then they would just forget the camera was there, and I captured everything. So everything in my life has been documented. So if the book takes off, maybe there's something that can be done about,
Awesome.
A real life story about a guy with 18 personalities and life. But what do you got? What else is coming out that you're really excited about next year? What do you got on the horizon for ECW Press?
There's going to be another Keith Elliott Greenberg book. He's working on something as we speak. He's documenting wrestling in the time of the pandemic and paralleling it with the 2020 election. So I'm really excited about that.
Sounds great.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of great books coming down the pipe. Not necessarily hockey books. We've got wrestling books. We've got some great hockey books coming. We've got I got a great novel coming next fall by a woman named Heather Tucker. There's just lots of exciting things. I got 2 really fantastic collections of poetry coming out next year, one by a guy named George Murray called Problematica, and another one by a guy I've been dying to work with for a long time named Adam Saul, so called Broken Dawn Blessings. I just really excited about these books, but there's lots of good stuff coming, and Tim Hornbaker's working on a serious biography, like a real serious biography of Ric Flair. So
wow.
That's going to be a couple years out, but it's going to be like a historical, research-based, no bullcrap biography of Ric Flair. So
that's one that had to be written. Actually, It had to be written. What a story.
Exactly.
What a life.
Yeah.
Wow. Can't wait for that one. And what a great writer associated with that project.
Yep.
Well, Michael, I want to thank you. Alex, any parting comments for Michael? I mean, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some ECW Press books, and I've loved all of them so far. That's started my wrestling historical perspective on things. So I look forward to John's book, to all the stuff that you have coming. It sounds like you've got some really cool things.
And Alex, thanks so much for asking me about poetry. You're the first person to do it in about 15 years. So that's nice.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, Alex and Michael, I want to thank you both for being on the show today. And Alex, we will speak to you in a couple weeks.
That's right.
Thanks.
All righty. Thank you both. Alex Robertson, Michael Holmes. Wow. Good conversation there. We are going to go over a few minutes today because I promised you something and I'm going to deliver it. And back in 1974, we had I had the opportunity to sit in the first row and like I did at most of the Madison Square Garden shows back in that era. And John Tolos was always one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. I watched him in Los Angeles. He was a babyface. He was a heel. He became Maniac John Tolos. And I always wished that he would wrestle in the Northeast. Of course, he did in the early days of his career. But he didn't come back until the time was to challenge Bruno Sammartino, who had recently re-won the world's title. So the clip that I'm going to play today, it's about 3.5 minutes long. It's from July 24th, 1974, Madison Square Garden, Bruno Sammartino and the Maniac John Tolos. So let's share the screen for you, and we will share it, and we will click on the match. I will share the screen. And let's show this bad boy right now. There's Tolos heading into the ring. I mean, John was never a big, huge, muscular guy, but he was very believable. And there's Bruno, there's the champ passing right in front of me in the first row. So I always this is before I was a ringside photographer. But just seeing Bruno enter the ring anytime was always just amazing. And Tolis, of course, is one of my favorites. I was, who do I cheer for here? Because I love Tolis and of course love Bruno. But here we go. Madison Square Garden, July of 1974. It was a sold-out house. And I haven't really watched this myself. I knew I had it digitized. And so I'm really kind of watching it now for the first time with all of you. And there's Tolis was working on his arm. Look at the strength of Bruno. Tolis was kind of surprised there. Just seeing Bruno and John is, what a feeling I'm getting right now just to see these two legends. And both of course, not here with us anymore. Nice hip toss there by Tolis. No crowd sounds in this, and it makes it even more cool, I think. Tolis was getting booed. He was getting called Maniac, I believe, and he didn't like that. A nice heel move with the pull of the hair. Now we're getting into a little of the rough stuff. Tolis always famous for the knee drop, and especially that knee drop off the second rope. Tosses Bruno out. And like I said, I've never seen footage of this match before anywhere. It wasn't even a very publicized match in the magazines even. But you're seeing it here for the first time. Bruno's getting a little hot. And he's making Mr. Tolis pay. Referee Dick Kroll, one of the staples at Madison Square Garden. Unfortunately, I don't have the finish of this match because I was also shooting pictures and trying to film at the same time, so it was a little difficult. I do remember Bruno winning this match with the backbreaker. And there you go. Well, that's Bruno and Killer Kowalski, and we'll leave that for another time. Well, I mean, 6:03 didn't go over too long after this, but I hope you enjoyed today's show, and I'll have more, as Mike McNair is saying here. Love the old MSG films. I love them too. I tell you, Mike, I mean, it's a treasure to have these things. James, first time I think we've heard from James was Tolis over in New York. Tolis was well known in New York because of all the coverage that was on Channel 41 with the Olympic Auditorium on the Spanish station in New York City. They played the Los Angeles Olympic Auditorium tapes, and that's how Tolis was known. And of course, all the fans, if they read the wrestling magazines, they would know John Tolis. John Tolis, what an amazing, amazing guy. And then I got to know him. He was in the WWF with a brief cup of coffee there. And he had that UWF run with Herb Abrams. You're quite welcome, Zachary. Richard, you're quite welcome. Dominic is not here again today. He's actually taking a test for a position. Now that the seasonal position is over, he had been offered another opportunity with the town of Babylon, so they had to give him a civil service test or something. So it was like 8 hours today. Dominic is not with us. today. Does WWE have any Madison Square Garden films from the early 70s? There's not a lot. I mean, what happened with me, and I'll just kind of give you a kind of a history. When I sold my house, I was selling my house in 2018, and I found boxes of these wrestling archives, and I felt that they would have a value. I had no idea I'd be back doing anything in wrestling. And I reached out to Ben Brown, who runs archives there, and said I had this amazing stuff, because not only do I have the films, but I got probably 10,000 negatives of matches I shot at the Garden and Philadelphia Arena and Boston Garden, because I used to go to all the shows there when I went to college there. And there was some interest. I had 3 meetings at the WWE headquarters with Ben, and I showed him the tapes, and he digitized some of them to show some other people. And then it just kind of sat there, and there was no activity. There was no movement. And at that time, I was thinking of doing some stuff in the wrestling business. So the conversations literally just stopped without any resolution to them. Would I sell them to the WWE now? Quite possibly, if they were going to find a home for them. I do think they need to go out there. And I do think that there's the history that I would love to see a company come in and utilize and see some of these films that I have and maybe do something with them. I pitched a show called Matt Memories to Ben and the WWE. I did the 2 pilots, one with Freddie Blassie, and then the day that Muhammad Ali jumped into the ring at Madison Square Garden. But like I said, it didn't go anywhere. So we'll see what happens. Once the book comes out, there may be some interest from people who may want to say, hey, this stuff has value now, but we'll see. I certainly don't intend on charging people money to see them. I initially was like, I'll charge people money and, they can get to see these clips, but that's not who I am, actually. But anyway, I mean, I really appreciate the comments today, and I wish I could answer each and every one of them, but it's almost impossible when you're trying to talk to guests. That's why a good producer is someone that you rely on, and my nephew certainly has had his own life, and he's a very active kid. He's a young man who's working all the time, and he's getting his master's degree, and he's got a lot of responsibilities for a kid who's only still 22. I have to make an announcement. There will be no show next week. Before we wrap all of this up today, there'll be no show next week. I am traveling up to New York for the Thanksgiving holiday. I'm going to have to, because of what's going on with COVID across the country, I have to get a negative test this week here in Tennessee and bring that up to New York. And then once I get to New York, I have to take another test based on the New York government rules now. So I'm going to be traveling next weekend, so there won't be a show. I'll be in transit. And then the next show after that will be, I think we're looking at the 21st, which is a Saturday, and that'll be the Saturday before Thanksgiving. I plan on being up in New York probably till right after Thanksgiving, or I may, depending on what's going on, I may stay up there through the end of the year. But we will figure it out. I want to make a couple of quick plugs here, as I do each and every week. I hope all of you are enjoying the podcast I did with Brian last, the pwspod.com. In that show, we're now in 1990, September 2nd's episode, where we make our debut at WBABAM. And that show is dropping tomorrow. So it's going to be quite an entertaining show. It's the longest show that we've done. I think it's over 2 hours in length because of the guests. We had Bill Apter in the studio. We had Paulie Dangerously on the phone. We had callers from everywhere. It was also covering the aftermath of the very first Wrestling Fans Fantasy Weekend and all the problems we had with Sting making an abrupt departure with a bunch of people online. So it's a crazy show. Drops tomorrow, PWS Pod. pwspod.com. But if you want to hear the entire, these are all 2-hour shows now with the new station, just go to patreon.com/Arezi, and you could hear all the 70 plus shows we have up there fully unedited and in their entirety. Other plugs, I have a Matt Marketplace, and we have a bunch of old vintage magazines right now that are up at facebook.com/John Arezzi's Matt Memories. I would love you all to subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/John Arezzi's Matt Memories. I'm going to be posting this San Martino Tolis match for everyone to see there, so that'll be going up. And other than that, anything else to plug? The book's coming out April the 6th. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up here for today, and I want everyone to stay safe out there, and hug your neighbor, no matter who they voted for. I mean, it's division. I mean, it's one against the other. I mean, it's scary what's going on and what's happening and what's been happening in this country for a long time. I just hope that everybody out there stays safe. And even if someone in your family voted for the other side, or your boss or your coworkers or the guy at the grocery store up the block, don't hate them. Don't hate anybody. Just let's try to get this country unified. No matter who is in office, you got to unify the country. There's too much division out there, and it's not good for anyone. It really is not. Until next time when we talk more wrestling with you, this is John Arezzi. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for letting me into your lives, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.